If you're hearing this, you found what they tried to bury in 1878. Her intake file classified, not sealed. I followed the dotted line on the map of St. Winifred's, the one that ends in nothing, and I swear I heard the footsteps before I took them. Room 12 exists twice, and I was standing in both at once. Don't go looking for it. The mirror already knows which of us stays, and which of us doesn't. If you like eerie stories, subscribe for your weekly fix, because once you've opened this map, you'll want to know where the next corridor leads. The winter of 1901 sealed the Hollis County Records office in Bracken Hollow, Pennsylvania, into a hushed vault of frost and paper, and Mara Keene, a junior clerk on duty, moved through its rows as though walking through a church after the service, careful not to disturb what silence believed it owned. Her assignment was simple: clear the bottom drawers of an oak cabinet labeled architectural exceptions, unratified plans, a designation she had never seen on her training sheets. The topmost bundle she pulled free was bound not in string but surgical gauze, stiffened with age, as if someone had dressed a wound and hidden it in bureaucracy. The gauze held the smell of iron and old rain, and when she untied it, the outer sheet sloughed apart, water-swollen deeds, leases whose ink had fled their letters, contracts that no longer carried meaning for anyone living. But the last item resisted pulp and ash. It lifted with the firm weight of linen-backed drafting paper, its weave smoother than skin, its surface taut with the quiet confidence of official records that still expected obedience. The title block had been scraped clean, leaving a scar of subtraction, yet the compass rose and watermark remained. St. Winifred's Infirmary, Rook Field, New Hampshire, drawn as if the building had not been condemned 20 years before. Room numbers marched in careful graphite, neat and unhurried, until her eyes caught the error that felt less like a mistake and more like defiance. Room 12 appeared where the West Wing kept it, small, windowless, neat, and again, faintly mirrored on the opposite side of the plan, where no corridor had ever been built. Between them stretched a dotted line, crossing white space like a rumor, beginning in certainty and ending in absence. No stair, no hatch, no door. In the lower margin, a line written in black ink refused to fade like the rest. Version discrepancy unresolved. Do not seal. Mara pressed her palm to the words and flinched. The ink was colder than the linen, as though it were a sliver of metal hammered into the paper. She searched for initials, for a surveyor's stamp, for any trace of ownership, but found only shallow scoring marks along the border, a blade once testing its sharpness across the edge. The filing card clipped to the bundle read architectural exceptions, non-permitted plans. Origin unknown. In pencil, a prior clerk had added, no engineer of record. She traced the dotted line with her cataloging pencil, but the lead caught against the fibers as though the paper resisted being written on. When she erased the tentative mark, the bruise of graphite still lingered, ghost punctuation that refused to disappear. The office clock ticked once, faltered, and ticked the same second again. Mara froze. It felt as if somewhere down the row of cabinets, another page had turned in perfect rhythm. She lifted the sheet to the window light and saw beneath the linen weave a faint undergrid. Fragile rectangles, ratios of servant quarters, and one dim square that matched the dimensions of a bricked-over closet. In the glass, her reflection blinked a fraction late, as if another self were standing behind the pane. She bent over her catalog card and began her entry. Map, St. Winifred's, 1901. Duplicate numbering of room 12. Advisory. Version discrepancy unresolved. Do not seal. But her pencil slipped, and in the margin she found another line written in a hand, she swore was not hers. Map visible if observed. Corridor persists if believed. Her tea steamed beside the desk, though she hadn't poured it, and the vapor briefly coiled into the exact shape of the dotted corridor before dissolving. She folded the linen along the dotted path, not its factory crease, and in doing so felt the weight of the room tilt. The phrase "do not seal" folded like a hinge, waiting for her to open it again. The ledger of St. Winifred's Infirmary in Brookfield, New Hampshire, opened the year 1878 with the same stiff ritual as every year before. Iron gall ink, parchment thick as skin, and a clerk's careful hand that wrote as if handwriting itself could stave off chaos. But on January 9th, an entry appeared that broke the ritual clean through. It named no guardian, no family, only the words female, juvenile, followed by not one but two different years of birth. 1869 inscribed neatly on the front, 1873 scrawled on the reverse. The script was identical, the ink unmixed, the hand steady, yet the contradiction was left uncorrected. Where a line should have been struck, none was. Instead, in the margin appeared a single directive, unresolved. Proceed with 1873. The initials belonged to Dr. Emery K. Hallberg, chief of the children's ward, known for his relentless precision and the way he annotated even his own dreams. Hallberg's private notes, surviving in fragments, describe the case in language he used nowhere else. Subject presents with impossible dualities, not delay but indeterminacy. Memory precedes context. The girl was assigned to room 12, a servant's chamber repurposed at the west end of the wing, a space with no fireplace, no window, and a single iron key kept in the matron's apron. Policy demanded children under 10 remain in view of nurse stations, but no board meeting debated the exception. Her arrival was absorbed by silence, like an envelope sealed without glue. Officially, she was 3 years old by the 1873 date, yet her speech was fluent, her reading comprehension clear, and she refused milk with calm insistence, requesting instead clove water. Her nightly temperatures shifted by 6, sometimes 8 degrees. Without fever or infection, her weight remained constant. One nurse recorded that when given letters to copy, she wrote in an adult's hand, strokes sharp and certain. But on other nights she stared at the pencil, as if waiting for someone else to remind her what it was. During her first mental evaluation, when asked the year, she did not say, "I don't know," or 1878. She replied, "Calm and exact, that depends." Which version of the year are you asking about? Nurses whispered of trauma. Hallberg did not agree. His charts abandoned her name and replaced it with a symbol. 2 vertical slashes with a gap between, a glyph never again found in his 22 years of work. In March, her handwriting appeared in the ward log, though no one admitted handing her the book. The date she inscribed was 2 weeks ahead. When that day came, and another hand wrote the same date again, staff looked at one another and said nothing. Nurse Joanna Bellamy began noting private observations. She dislikes repetition of hours. When the clock is wound wrong, she waits for it to catch up. In April, an assistant attempted to copy her file for administrative clarity. The carbon duplicate was rejected, and the index book skipped the number entirely, leaving the words, "This record does not repeat." No one claimed authorship. The ink matched no pen in circulation that month. By May, the girl's evaluations had become a contest. 1 week she solved arithmetic for a 12-year-old. The next she failed to name a circle. Nurses described her silence not as emptiness, but as choice. She never answered to her assigned name, never responded to dear or child, but asked only one question, always with the same unbroken cadence. Which version of the year are we in? Hallberg's final note that spring leaned into the ledger's margin. Words slanted as if the ink resisted the page. Patience speaks as if the future is already past, but unchosen. She does not ask to be believed, only to be placed correctly. By the spring of 1879, room 12 had become less a room than a punctuation mark, present in ink, but absent in memory, a place people wrote around, but never directly into. The chart outside the door was quietly replaced with a blank brass plate, polished so often it gleamed with nothing but reflection. Yet the dietary log still listed meals for R12, and one porter added a line in pencil that nearly rubbed away in erasure. Do not knock twice. Laundry slips continued to request linens for room 12, though no staff were listed as responsible, as though sheets were being laundered by the air itself. The nurses assigned to the West Wing rotated out abruptly, their names disappearing from rosters without explanation. Most striking was Nurse Ada Bellamy, whose night journals had been precise, almost obsessive, until they ended mid-sentence. Her private notebook, hidden behind a floorboard and discovered decades later, revealed what the ledgers refused to. There are two of her. Not sisters, the same child twice. Bellamy described door-glass glimpses, one girl staring forward while another figure crossed behind her reflection. She noted moments when a lullaby began on one set of lips but ended on another. A sketch showed two profiles, identical, labeled AM and PM, their eyes fixed in opposite directions. On April 19th, she wrote, "I tucked one into bed." The mattress bore two impressions, yet supply forms confirmed only one bed had ever been ordered. By May, her writing collapsed into erratic margins, pages out of order, and finally a chilling line. She looked up and said that version is closed. Meanwhile, the hospital's filing cabinets began to shift. One drawer rattled when opened, its contents rearranged as if by unseen hands, and in its place appeared a new card, 3189Q, child, stamped in heavy ink. On May 22nd, two men arrived in wool coats with no insignia. They signed no guest book, greeted no staff, and walked directly into Superintendent Cyrus Mander's office. When they left less than 30 minutes later, one carried an oak drawer under his arm, brass plate gleaming with the designation 3189 quetzales. That evening, the patient index skipped an entire line, jumping numbers as if to erase a ghost. The next morning, staff whispered about a federal audit, though no auditor's name appeared in state records. In Mander's private ledger, only one entry was made that day, progress noted. Retained silence. Soon after, an unsigned memorandum circulated. Disregard the 5 minutes prior to engagement. Do not attempt recall. Doctors who once competed to test the girl's cognition began writing not applicable beside their schedules, a code reserved for empty rooms or fumigation. Orderlies whispered of lights under the door, though no lamp was assigned. One swore the west windows reflected a second hallway that didn't exist. Meal logs grew stranger. Trays sometimes returned empty and cold, or sealed yet warm to the touch, annotated by an unfamiliar hand. Plate unclaimed. No scent. Bellamy's replacement confessed she once saw both girls in different corridors at once, though one corridor had been bricked over years earlier. By summer, the record had fractured into silences. Pages skipped, names erased, notes written in inks no one could trace. The Vanishing ledger was not a single book, but an infection, a language of absences spreading until room 12's existence was less written than implied, less recorded than whispered, and always in words no one dared repeat. By 1912, The ruin of St. Winifred's Infirmary had already been partially bricked over. The west wing collapsed into vines and silt, but fragments of its shadow continued surfacing in places the county couldn't explain. That spring, at a private estate auction in Thatcher's Run, New Hampshire, a photograph appeared without provenance, printed on gelatin silver paper, and labeled only on the reverse with the number 12. The image seemed ordinary at first glance. A cot with its wool blanket tucked sharp, a wooden chair stationed beside a wash basin, walls stripped of paint in even vertical strokes. But the mirror in the frame betrayed the ordinary. Its reflection showed two impressions in the bed, one deep, the other faint, while the bed itself bore only a single indentation. Archivists tested the negative for double exposure, warping, or emulsion failure. Each test returned clean. The Bureau of Archival Preservation in Philadelphia issued its only conclusion: discrepancy unexplained. By 1914, investigators returned to the infirmary, but the mirror was gone. The ward's maintenance log listed only removed. Tag 11B. Yet no such tag was ever found in state or federal storage. Former staff admitted in unsigned affidavits that no one remembered cleaning the mirror or even daring to look into it. One nurse recalled glimpsing her reflection pause, hesitating longer than she had. The photograph passed eventually into the hands of Dr. Matthias Elwood, a collector of oddities who pinned it above his desk and annotated his journal. Impression without presence, reflection without source, contradiction visible only when not sought. Family members later claimed the glass frame cracked down its center on his first night of ownership. When Elwood died in 1933, his family burned most of his papers, but spared the photo, saying it hummed faintly when touched. By then, the image had already passed into whispers among collectors, vanishing into private hands, never officially cataloged. But stranger still was what occurred nearly 2 decades after the infirmary's closure. In the winter of 1931, a barefoot woman appeared at the edge of Pembroke Hollow, a hamlet of less than 40 residents in Hollis County. She carried nothing but a shard of silver glass, edges cutting into her palm, and spoke in a diction too old for the present. When asked her name, she listed those who should have been long dead: Dr. Hallberg, Nurse Bellamy, Superintendent Mander, as though they were still at their posts. Her appearance suggested early 40s, but her mannerisms were precise, childlike, and she refused bedding as if beds were dangerous. The shard she carried revealed faint pressed words, not ink, but indentation. This version is not the original. Do not follow. During her intake interview at the Staten State Asylum, she repeated the same phrase over and over. I left, but I did not exit. On the second night, she paused mid-sentence as though waiting for another voice to arrive. By morning, she was gone, her bed unused, her water untouched, her files stamped non-retainable. The shard disappeared with her, though one clerk swore a fresh staff number appeared beneath the blank transfer signature, written in a practiced hand. The page showed no crease, no sign it had ever been turned, and the ink sat brighter than the rest, as though it belonged to another year. Villagers whispered of seeing her shadow pacing in Pembroke Hollow's churchyard, though the church bell would not chime the nights they claimed she was there. The county coroner dismissed it all as superstition, yet admitted privately that during her asylum stay, her reflection never appeared in the observation mirror. Together, the photograph and the shard stitched a single warning across decades. Room 12 had not ended with demolition. It had migrated into glass, into reflection, into versions of people that time itself had never chosen. By 1956, the ruins of St. Winifred's Infirmary had long since been stripped for brick and timber, but its language, odd phrases, and unsigned directives was still surfacing where it had no business being. At a neurological ward in Boston, a requisition slip for sedatives appeared with no patient name, only the phrase instance 12, a code no staff admitted to inventing. In Vermont at Mayfield Asylum, a red annotation crept into a child's file. Extra sequential identity variants, written in pigment inconsistent with the facility's ink stock. In Pennsylvania, another physician found the words cognitive encryption beside a case history of a girl who solved equations before they were asked aloud. No one claimed authorship. Handwriting varied just enough to scatter blame, as though the terminology itself was contagious. By the early 1950s, unsigned memoranda were circulating through the medical community with chilling consistency. Containment preferable to reintegration. Instability precedes awareness. The language read less like diagnosis and more like protocol. In one instance, a requisition log for sedatives referenced instance 12 again, this time initialed by no attending physician, its ink bolder than the rest. Former staff from St. Winifred's whispered that the phrase had been their secret shorthand decades before, but no one confessed to keeping it alive. The trail bent from medicine into defense when a charred manifest, pulled from the furnace of a military depot in Virginia, listed juvenile female cortex, temporal disarray. The container had been cataloged under signal intelligence, not pathology, and was lined with brass and lead. Its lid engraved with 3 concentric circles broken at uneven intervals. The symbol matched no agency, no laboratory, no cryptographic body on record. A marginal note in a different hand reads simply, identity loop not closed. Contain until reentry stabilizes. The choice of words unsettled even hardened archivists. It sounded less like medicine, more like code breaking. Later, during a post-war audit, the War Department issued a restricted report titled Initial Assessments of Legacy Containment Incidents. Among disease control failures and untraceable physiological anomalies, one entry stood out, the 1878 anomaly. It read, with mechanical detachment, subject presented with more than one temporal signature. Identity fixation unresolvable. Case required suppression due to risk of propagation via maternal inheritance. The word maternal was underlined in darker ink, an emphasis no one admitted to making. The case was sealed under National Security Tier 3, non-combatant, a classification reserved for weapons that never left blueprints. No appendix, no photographs, no witness statements, just silence disguised as bureaucracy. But archivists later discovered an extra page tucked into the folder, dated only October 1956. It bore no signature, only the words, "There are children still alive today." Check the years they ask about. The page's watermark was stranger still. It read 1961, 5 years in the future. From then on, the phrase extra sequential identity variants disappeared from medicine, but lingered in whispers. Shorthand meant not to explain, but to cauterize. The containment language had worked, not to heal or to study, but to seal silence around a wound that time refused to close. The winter of 1901 still pressed against the tall windows of the Hollis County Archives, and Mara Keene, bent beneath her desk lamp, understood now that the map before her was not a record of a building. It was a door that had never been shut. The linen weighed heavier than any document she had handled, as though it had swallowed every vanished ledger, every erased file, every marginal warning that had been written into silence. When she traced the dotted line with her finger, a vibration hummed through the desk. Low, steady, the way a struck tuning fork lingers in bone. Her reflection in the cabinet glass refused obedience. lifting its hand before hers, eyes lagging like a second witness. Around her desk lay the fragments she had gathered. Photocopies of Nurse Bellamy's journal, the requisition slips muttering instance 12, the War Department's phrase about maternal inheritance, all of them circling the same gravity, room 12. Her pencil hovered over the mirrored 12 on the map, but the page seemed to push back, fibers tightening as if the linen knew she was about to commit. The filing cabinets creaked down the aisle like voices shifting in sleep, and Mara smelled clove water, faint but sharp, though no one else had entered the room. The office clock stuttered, repeating the same second twice, and her own voice spilled into the silence without permission. Which version of the year are we in? The sound returned a beat too late, spoken by lips she had not moved. The dotted line no longer resembled ink, but a hallway seen through smoke, waiting for her to step into its geometry. She remembered the barefoot woman in Pembroke Hollow, clutching a mirror shard that warned, "This version is not the original. Do not follow." And yet the map in her hands unfolded like a demand, not a suggestion. The desk blotter bore 2 impressions, her hand, and another already in place, pressing harder, deciding first. Her catalog card filled itself, line by line. Map visible if observed. Corridor persists if believed. The ink in the margin seemed brighter now. Iron catching lamp light. The words "do not seal" repeating like a drumbeat she had mistaken for her pulse. She raised her eyes to the cabinet glass. The reflection smiled. She hadn't. The drawer beneath her desk slid open with a shriek, revealing only absence, hollow with that stretched deeper than the desk allowed, like a phantom corridor carved in shadow. Loose papers stirred though the air remained still, aligning themselves with the dotted path, forming an aisle from her chair to the map's mirrored 12. For the first time, she saw that the map was not a memory of St. Winifred's. It was a sketch of the archives themselves, redrawn to host the corridor now. The presence at her shoulder grew heavier, not hostile, not kind, but patient, as if waiting for her to decide what it already knew. If she folded the map shut, perhaps the reflection would vanish, perhaps the impressions would collapse into one. But folding was not sealing, and she knew the word seal had never been a suggestion. The War Department's phrase echoed like a whisper in steel, containment preferable to reintegration. But Mara realized containment had never been her choice. The dotted line deepened, the mirrored room 12 shone brighter than the original, and her initials appeared at the bottom of the card though she had not written them. She whispered, barely audible, "Do I follow?" And the impression beside hers pressed harder, as though answering. And in that moment, Mara understood. The map had never asked for her consent. It had only waited for her to notice she was already walking.